Today, we're looking at something pretty significant, a diplomatic pivot from the UK. It's really shifted things, this sudden, very explicit push for recognizing Palestinian statehood.
It really is a notable move. And when you dig into the source material, the timing, well, it's clearly not random. This isn't just some gradual foreign policy evolution. It looks like a direct response to a mix of really intense immediate pressures.
Pressures from where?
Both international momentum, quite strong actually, and crucially significant domestic political forces too.
Right. Okay, so for this deep dive, our mission really is to try and cut through some of the noise, extract those specific political drivers, and look at the immediate reactions that help explain why the UK is doing this now and, what it signals about Prime Minister Starmer's leadership. Okay, let's unpack this then. When a major global player like the UK fundamentally changes tack on something like this, you always look for the trigger, right? What were the key forces, particularly externally, that pushed this official declaration forward?
Yeah, you definitely have to start with the international picture, and specifically France. It seems the UK's move isn't happening in a vacuum. It's very closely linked to a big diplomatic effort being led by French President Emmanuel Macron.
Interesting. So is the UK playing catch-up here or following France's lead?
That seems to be a key part of it, yes. Look, Macron is about to co-chair a really important conference at the UN happening on Monday, and the whole point of that conference is to try and kickstart, real steps towards a two-state solution.
Okay.
So that creates a very specific and frankly urgent diplomatic window. The thinking in the UK must have been that they needed to get their position out there clearly and strongly, or they risked kind of being sidelined in this whole European conversation about what a future peace might look like.
That makes sense. So it frames the UK's decision less as some internal strategic shift bubbling up over time and more like a reaction to a deadline almost set by an ally.
Yeah.
If they'd waited longer.
Exactly. They might have lost influence, right? Lost their say on the agenda being shaped at the UN.
Yeah.
When France takes the lead on something this major, other European powers, like the UK, they face a choice. You either get on board, amplify the push, or you sit it out and risk looking, well, maybe irrelevant or even obstructionist. So for the UK, jumping on this international opportunity was probably about maintaining its desired role on the world stage.
Okay, but seizing that international moment meant Starmer had to make a pretty big shift himself, didn't he? On a policy that's historically been, let's say, politically tricky in Britain.
Absolutely.
Our sources are really clear that while Macron might have set the timing, the actual need for the change was being driven hard by domestic pressure right on Starmer.
And that's the core tension here, isn't it? Starmer's previous stance was, well, it was classic political balancing act. He'd supported Palestinian statehood in principle. You hear that phrase a lot.
In principle. Sounds good, but what does it actually mean?
Exactly. It's politically safe. It's rhetorical. But crucially, he had always refused to put any kind of timeline on actually granting official status.
Let's just pause on that for a second, because that difference is important for listeners, I think. What's the real-world difference between supporting something in principle and committing to granting official status?
Yeah, it's huge. In principle basically means, I agree this is where we should eventually end up, but it doesn't require you to do anything now. No difficult UN votes, no formal diplomatic recognition, no treaty changes, none of the immediate political friction.
Right.
But granting official status, that's the heavy lifting, diplomatically speaking. It means taking concrete actions, voting yes on resolutions, maybe opening an embassy down the line, treating Palestine effectively as a peer state. That's a real policy commitment. It comes with political risks and gets immediate international attention.
Right, and that sort of fence-sitting, the in-principle stage, that became completely unsustainable, apparently, earlier this year. So where was this pressure actually coming from? Who was pushing him?
Well, it wasn't just, a few activists on the fringes. The sources say the pressure was widespread. It came from large parts of the Labour Party base, the youth sections, and, this is critical, from members of his own cabinet.
Okay, so right from the top.
Exactly. When the people running the government alongside you are demanding action, you can't really ignore it as a minor issue anymore. Starmer must have realized he had a serious political headache brewing, one that could potentially undermine his own authority within the party.
And what was the immediate danger he was trying to head off with this essentially foreign policy announcement?
The sources highlight two main goals. First, the obvious one, showing solidarity with Palestinians, addressing those deep humanitarian concerns that were clearly resonating within his party.
Makes sense.
Second, and this is the really crucial political calculation, it seems, he hopes this firm decision will help calm the mood ahead of Labour's annual conference, which is coming up soon.
Okay, why is this conference so important? For listeners maybe outside the UK, why call it a litmus test?
Well, the annual conference is it's the big event where the party's grassroots members, the activists, the trade unions, they all come together. They debate policy. They vote on the party's direction.
Right.
And if a major policy area like the Middle East stance is seen as weak or evasive by the members, it can blow up. You can get embarrassing floor debates, votes going against the leadership, open arguments. It signals weakness, basically.
So Starmer is using this big foreign policy move, aligning with Macron, committing to statehood partly to try and prevent a big internal fight, to look decisive before that conference even starts.
It certainly looks that way. It's almost like political risk management packaged as diplomatic leadership, preempting a potential showdown.
That's quite a gamble, betting that a complex international statement can solve a tricky domestic party management problem. Okay, so let's look at the fallout then. If part of the aim was solidarity, how did the Palestinian leadership actually receive this news?
The reaction seems to have been very positive, yes, but also quite measured in the commentary. Palestinian Foreign Minister Varsan Aghabekian Shaheen immediately welcomed these declarations. She saw them as real validation.
So more than just nice words for her.
Definitely. Speaking from Ramallah, Shaheen called it a clear move bringing us closer to sovereignty and independence. But, and I think this is the key insight for you listening, it's how she framed the momentum. She was realistic up front. She said something like, it might not end the war tomorrow.
Okay.
But then she immediately pivoted to its strategic importance. She called it a move forward, which we need to build on and amplify. So she clearly sees it as a vital building block, a shift in the diplomatic landscape, even if it's not the final piece of the puzzle.
That realism is interesting. It suggests they understand the gap between, political support from a friendly country and actually achieving full independence on the ground. Now, let's switch focus to the other major global player here, the U.S. angle. This UK policy shift happened to coincide with Donald Trump's high-profile visit to the UK just last week.
Yes, that timing was certainly interesting. And this policy difference did create what the sources call a noticeable point of tension, specifically during a joint press conference they held, Starmer and Trump, at Chequers.
Chequers, that's the Prime Minister's country estate, right? A place for serious talks, usually private ones.
Exactly. It's not just any backdrop. It's reserved for high-level, often sensitive diplomacy. So the fact they address this difference there underlines its significance.
So in that quite formal, high-pressure setting, how did Trump actually handle this sudden divergence on Palestinian statehood? Did he criticize Starmer?
It was, classic Trump diplomacy in a way, a bit of a performance. He acknowledged it publicly. He said Starmer's push for statehood was, quote, one of our few disagreements. So he put the split on the record.
Okay.
But then, and this is the fascinating part, he didn't really take Starmer to task over it in public, didn't lecture him. In fact, the source knows he actually patted him on the back, a physical gesture suggesting camaraderie, while at the same time delivering a very clear, non-negotiable red line for the U.S.
Which was?
That Hamas is, quote, a terrorist organization who can have no part in any future governance in Palestine. So the U.S. message, via Trump, seemed to be, look, we recognize your right to make this policy choice, but our core security demands haven't changed one bit.
Yeah.
It kind of allowed Starmer to look like he was charting his own course, while Trump simultaneously reassured everyone about alignment on counterterrorism. It kept the overall relationship looking smooth, at least on the surface.
That is very delicate maneuvering, isn't it? Making sure one policy split doesn't derail the whole partnership. But we should probably zoom out a bit. This kind of move, recognizing statehood, surely risks upsetting other allies in the region, right? What about, say, the Israeli reaction or other opposing views, even if our main sources focus on Starmer?
That's a really important point. While the specific source material we're discussing doesn't give us, say, a direct quote from an Israeli official reacting in that same press conference, we absolutely have to infer the context here. A move like this, especially aligning with France and this UN momentum, immediately creates friction with any government that opposes unilateral recognition.
Why, specifically?
Because, from their perspective, it's seen as undermining the whole point of future negotiations. It's like giving away the final prize statehood without first getting the security guarantees or the bilateral agreements that, in their view, must come first.
It sort of prejudges the outcome of talks that haven't even happened yet.
Precisely. It changes the leverage at the negotiating table. The UK is essentially saying, we believe statehood is the destination, which potentially reduces the incentive for some parties to make concessions towards that destination through talks.
Got it. So for Starmer, this diplomatic push is definitely a calculated risk. He might gain peace within his party and some standing in Europe,
Right.
but potentially at the expense of complicating future diplomatic relationships with a key player in the Middle East itself.
That's the tightrope he's walking now?
Okay. So let's try and pull this all together. What does this all mean? We've got the French diplomacy basically firing the starting gun. We've got this really strong internal need to unify the Labour Party before the conference, and maybe a genuine element of wanting to show solidarity. Starmer seems to be juggling all three.
Yeah, and what's really striking, I think, is the tactical element of it. Starmer is using a foreign policy announcement, which, let's be honest right now, doesn't require deploying troops or spending vast sums of money immediately to solve a really pressing, high-stakes domestic political problem.
Which is guaranteeing a smooth annual conference that shores up his leadership.
Exactly. He gets to appear decisive on the world stage, aligning with European partners, while simultaneously taking the heat out of a major internal party issue. It's quite clever politically.
Using the international spotlight almost as a shield against problems at home. And the way the Palestinian foreign minister reacted, framing it as a building block, not the end game that seems to reinforce the idea that this move is more about changing the diplomatic weather than delivering an instant solution. It moves the goalposts, as they say.
It really does. It shifts the whole focus of the conversation. It moves it away from if statehood should be supported in principle towards the much harder but arguably more important question of how you actually implement it on the ground.
Which requires practical steps, negotiation, all the difficult stuff.
Right. The UK has now planted its flag on one side of that debate, and that creates momentum. Other countries, other players, now have to react to that new reality.
And maybe that leads us to the final thought we should leave you, the listener, with today. We've seen that Starmer's declaration seems primarily driven by riding this international wave set by Macron and the UN, and very much by managing intense domestic political heat. So the question is, what's the realistic, practical timeline for a declaration like this, which is essentially political solidarity right now, to actually translate into the kind of recognized, functioning statehood that Minister Shaheen welcomed? That implementation piece.
Well, history isn't always encouraging on that front, is it? The history of non-binding declarations and resolutions is, well, it's long, but the history of them leading to immediate successful implementation, particularly in conflict zones, that's a much shorter list.
Yeah.
The diplomatic road from declaration to reality is often incredibly long, paved with good intentions, perhaps, but taking decades sometimes to become concrete. You could argue the political win Starmer needed today is quite separate from the long diplomatic marathon that this declaration has just kicked off.
A really important distinction to keep in mind. It pushes us to look beyond the headline, beyond the solidarity, and think about the incredibly complex, grinding work of actual diplomatic implementation that still lies far down the road. Thanks for digging into the sources with us today.